Will you pray for me? Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So today is Stewardship Sunday, as Scott said, as hopefully you know, or if you didn't, hopefully you saw on the front of the bulletin. Stewardship Sunday, and I have a confession to make to you. I've been around church for a long time. Grew up in the church, went to church all through high school, took a little break in college, but went right back after that. Been working in the church for 10 or more years now. I've been through a lot of stewardship seasons and a lot of stewardship Sundays. I've said that word many times, stewardship. I've written it down a lot. I've preached about it a lot. I've heard you talk about it a lot. I've prayed over my own stewardship. I've prayed for your stewardship. And here's my confession. I have never once heard, said, or prayed over that word without thinking of the Lord of the Rings. Do you know the steward of Gondor? Anybody here? Can I get an amen if you know it? You don't have to say it out loud. Just say it in your heart. Right, this is all supposed to be about God and how we pour ourselves out into the world, and all I can picture is the steward of Gondor from the Lord of the Rings. Here's the story. So this is a world that's sort of like this world, maybe in the Middle Ages, but there are elves and orcs and demons and good wizards and bad wizards and all this stuff, but there's a kingdom of humans. They call it Gondor, and it's the greatest kingdom of humans that has ever existed, and there's always a king in Gondor. And the king has a steward, and whenever the king is away at war or is incapacitated or can otherwise not attend to the king's duties, it's the steward's job to act as the king in the king's absence. And one day, the king rides off to war and dies without an heir. And so there's the steward left there in the kingdom wondering what to do, and so he just keeps on keeping on. He has all the king's powers. It's his job to be the king until the return of the king, and so he does. And when he dies, his son does it after him, and when he dies, his son does it after him. For 25 generations, the stewards of Gondor rule the kingdom. And everyone, when he takes his oath of office, promises to do this office, to fulfill this office faithfully until the return of the king. 25 generations, and then there's the 26th steward of Gondor. And he sits there in his chair. He doesn't sit, there's a great big throne way up high. They don't sit on that throne. They sit in a chair down on the first step, and there's a crown, but they don't wear that. There's a scepter, but they don't carry that. There's a great sword of destiny. They don't touch that. They rule the kingdom with all the powers of the king. They can make treaties, mint money, go to war, everything that a king can do, but they do it until the return of the king, until the 26th one is there, and suddenly the city is surrounded by enemies. The worst enemies of the age, the worst enemies the city or any king or steward has ever faced, and at the very same time, the heir, the new king, is revealed. And he throws back his cloak, as it were, this new king, and people are blinded by his brilliance. The king has returned, and there is the 26th steward sitting there. And he always said, I'm just doing this for the king. All my powers, they're derivative. I'm just a placeholder. I'm just doing this until the king gets back. And he says it just like his father and his father and his father had said it for all those generations, and they really believed it. They really were faithful in executing their powers, in taking care of their duties, in protecting the realm. They really did believe that they were just doing it until the king came back. But 25 generations is a long time. And so when the king came back, the steward was undone. He never called himself a king, but he'd been acting that way for a long time. And then when the real king came back, he couldn't handle it. He ended up dousing himself with oil, setting himself on fire, and jumping off the ramparts of the castle. So that's what I think of whenever Stewardship Sunday rolls around. And it's a good story, right? Right? Kind of sticks in the mind. I remember reading it for the first time when I was in elementary school. I remember seeing the movie. It sticks there. And I can't let it go, and there's a good reason. Tolkien knew what he was doing when he wrote this. He knew not just the story that was being written in his head, but he knew the story we read today. He knew the great long story of Christianity, and he knew this: at the center of the Christian faith is the belief that Jesus will come back one day. Is the assumption that we are all sitting here waiting for the return of the King. He knew this about us, that we've been sitting there in our little chairs. We don't climb the throne. We always say everything we have belongs to God. All the powers that we execute, those are from God. All the money we have, that belongs to God. All our duties, we're just doing them for God's sake until the return of Jesus Christ, who will set everything right. But it's been a long time that he's been gone, has it not? And there are those in the world, there are those in these pews, there are maybe even those inside you, as there are inside me, who say, he's not coming back. The King is gone. In Gondor, the steward, the last steward, his son once said, how long will it take until a steward becomes a king? And the last steward, he said this, in places of less royalty, few years perhaps. In Gondor, 10,000 years would not suffice to make a steward a king. How long would suffice to turn one of us into Jesus Christ? How long would it take? How long would we have to wait before one of us was ready to sit on that throne and rule everything? I don't know about you, but I have enough trouble ruling my own life. Never mind everything, everywhere. So here's what 2 Thessalonians was about. Someone was saying that Jesus had already come back, that the end of time was already here, that all the prophecies had been fulfilled, and the author wanted you to know that he has not, in fact, come back, that we are still waiting, that we are still those stewards sitting at the bottom of the throne. And he said this, here's how you know that he hasn't come back. Because in the time before he comes back, there will be one that they call the lawless one. Some traditions, some translations of the Bible call him the anarchist. We don't know who this lawless one, who this anarchist was. Is it the Antichrist? Is it Satan? Is it supposed to stand in for some political figure, Caesar or someone? We have no idea, except I think that you've met him. I think that you've clapped eyes on her. If you're like me, you do it every morning when you look in the mirror. Because another way of saying that someone is a lawless one, another way of saying that someone is an anarchist, is to say that that person thinks that she is a law unto herself. Don't you hear that in yourself sometimes? Isn't there a voice in you that says, I am the master of my own destiny. I am in charge of my life. I have earned everything I have. I have worked hard for the money in my bank account and the car in the parking lot and the roof over my head. I deserve this. Isn't there a voice in you that says, I ought to get NPR for free and turn it off when pledge drive starts and turn it back on when it's over? Isn't there a voice in you that says, it's all mine, and if you try to take it from me, I would rather destroy it than let you have it. I'd rather set it on fire and throw it off the parapet of the castle than let you get it. You try to take my money from me, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll buy a great big boat with it. I'll put it where you can't get it. I'll buy a tall double latte with whipped cream every single day. I will set that money on fire and throw it over the edge so that you can't get it because it's mine. Am I the only one? Don't you hear that voice in your head? And if you're like me, you can talk a good talk. You can say, it just belongs to God. I'm just a steward. I'm just managing it until God gets back. I can say that. I can write that. You've read it when I've written it. I hope you've read it. But it's a little harder to live into in real life, in day-to-day life. So that's why we have Stewardship Sunday. That's why we have a stewardship season. The theme of this stewardship, hopefully you've seen, involves that prayer that God put a fresh heart into you. Here's how you battle the lawless one, the anarchist that is within you, the one who claims that you are a law unto yourself, just like a steward with no king. Here's how you battle it. With a heart that has two strokes. With a heart that fills itself up with gratitude and then pumps out generosity. That's the fresh heart that God puts in you, a heart that beats gratitude and generosity, that draws gratitude for what you have, what you've been given, what has derived from others unto you fills you up with gratitude and then pumps generosity back out in the world. That's how you silence that voice, with the beating of a heart like that, not with the cold, shriveled, dead heart of the anarchist. You breathe in and you fill that heart that God has given you, and then you let it pump love, pump beauty, pump justice out into the world. That's the fresh heart that God has promised to put in you, and that's what this day is about. How long would it take for a steward to become a king? 10,000 years in Gondor. I don't know how long here. How long will it take before the king comes back? I don't know. Is he coming back? I don't know. But I'm willing to stake my life on it if I can. I'm willing to stake a check on it if I can. I'm willing to stake a pledge on it if I can. I'm willing to beg for that lively, beautiful, beating heart that only God can give. If you're willing to join me in that work, say amen.